12 hours of Sebring Camel GT sports car race is into its 7th hour. Motorcycle racer Freddie Spencer, our 1983 Racer of the Year, has launched defense of his World Motorcycle Championship in South Africa. And the first green flag of the 1984 Formula One road racing season is just hours away in Brazil. Bob Barsha is on top of all of those stories, and he'll report here shortly. In drag racing this week, technological leaps and bounds have pushed men and machines to speeds never before reached. A local sports announcer, Steve Russell, went out to cover the drags last weekend, and he stumbled into a gold mine. Everything you'll see in the next minute and 15 seconds is a world record.
This is the Gainesville Raceway in Gainesville, Florida, home of the 15th annual NHRA Gator Nationals. A huge crowd's on hand. The weather has cooperated perfectly, and already several track and national records have been broken. The big stories of this race came during the finals of the funny car and top fuel competitions, where two men broke the seemingly impossible 260-mile-per-hour barrier. The honor of being the first man in drag racing history to crack the 260 barrier was earned by top fueler Joe Amato, driving the Hurst Shifter Special. His record run of 262.39 miles an hour now ranks as the fastest run in drag racing history. The Old Forge, Pennsylvania native beat out Gary Beck, the defending champion, to win his first Gator Nationals title. In fact, a total of 4 national records were set at this year's Gators. The Budweiser King of Kenny Bernstein won his first Gator Nationals title by beating the '84 Camaro of John Collins, and in doing so, made a blistering run of 260.11 miles an hour, breaking another record he had set earlier in the day. The Dallas, Texas native credits his crew and their knowledge of aerodynamics in giving him the edge. The 260-mile-per-hour barrier has been eclipsed now, and with advances in aerodynamics and design, this could be the beginning of yet more record runs to come. In Gainesville, Florida, I'm Steve Russell for MotorWeek Illustrated.
260 miles an hour from a standing start in a quarter of a mile, that's a mind-boggling accomplishment. Last Saturday here on MotorWeek, Kenny Bernstein talked about the computer that helps his funny car run faster. Less than 24 hours later at the Gator Nationals, Bernstein and computer shattered the 260-mile-per-hour barrier. Funny car technology obviously is advancing in leaps and bounds. Keep in mind, those cars didn't go 250 until 1982. And we still get an occasional reminder that at that kind of speed, things can get pretty hairy. Now, 10 more miles an hour have been added to terminal velocity in just 2 years. The potential for funny car speed escalation is clear. In contrast, top fuel drivers have been chipping away at 260 for nearly a decade. Don Garlits did the first 250-mile-an-hour quarter way back in 1975. He was also first to go 240 in drag racing's dark ages, 1968. In fact, Big Daddy wrote the book on top fuel technology, which hasn't changed much since he first put the motor behind the driver in 1970. The basic top fuel technology elements: an engine that makes ground-shaking power, huge slick tires to transfer that power to the track, and an aerodynamic wing. Its purpose is to create downforce and hold the whole shooting match on the ground. Last Sunday, a subtle refinement of one of those technologies, the wing, finally lifted a top fuel car past the 260-mile-an-hour mark. Even Joe Amato probably realizes that in the top fuel class, just as in funny cars, future records may well have to be computer-assisted. But for now, Joe has milked the last out of the old technology. He borrowed a wing from another form of motorsport, and it worked.
It's a special new Indianapolis type for the '84 car. It's been wind tunnel tested and all the, just like Bernstein's car, you know, with 260. The wind tunnels are in, computers are in, and I'm gonna go home and put a computer on my car. We have one in our business, so I'll just have to, you know, maybe we can go 270 with a computer and figure everything out.
Amato's 260-mile-an-hour run remarkable in that it came in the car's debut weekend. The new wing, mounted high, far to the rear, takes less power to create the same downforce. That leaves more power to set world records. And our Wrangler U.S. Air Force Reserve Behind the Scenes Award this week goes to the brains behind that concept, Eldon Rasmussen, former IndyCar driver turned car builder. And Eldon gets a new outfit from Wrangler and a shot at the Honda VT500 Ascot motorcycle that goes to our year-end Behind the Scenes Award winner. It's interesting to speculate how soon a funny car may actually run faster in a quarter mile than a fueler. The speed records are very close now, but as any drag race purist knows, elapsed time, ET, is the statistic that gets you to the finish line first. It is also worthy of note that Don Garlits, to whom drag racing owes so much, is a Florida native. With all his friends in town for the Gator Nationals, Big Daddy celebrated by opening his long-awaited museum. It's worth a visit if the name Swamp Rat means anything to you at all. Big Daddy's famous cars all bore that name. They're now permanently displayed in Ocala, Florida. And lest you think we have forgotten about the pro stock class at the Gator Nationals, watch this. This is the final. Warren Johnson, left lane. He had driven his Oldsmobile to a world record 182 miles an hour in eliminations. A late race bobble here, but he still beats Frank Iaconio in the finals. Johnson, the champion. Both ends of the pro stock record upped in Florida. Lee Shepard set a new ET mark before losing to Iaconio in the quarterfinals. All the National Hot Rod Association stars will take another shot at the record books at Atlanta Dragway on April 15th, the Southern Nationals. Hosted the Winston Cup stock cars last Sunday. Looked like the big story was Ford versus Chevy, but in the end, a surprise winner overshadowed brand rivalry. Ned Jarrett describes the action.
With the Fords of Buddy Baker, Ricky Rudd, and Bill Elliott holding 3 of the first 4 starting spots, the Railbirds were saying it would be a Ford day, but some GM drivers had other ideas. Hale Yarborough in the Chevrolet number 28 moved to the front on the first lap from his 3rd starting spot. He pushed Baker back. Bobby Allison in the white Buick number 22 challenged early, and Benny Parsons let the world know right off he could run with the best of them in the Chevrolet number 55. So did Dale Earnhardt in the Chevrolet number 3. Baker was the only Ford driver who could even come close to staying with the GM cars, but an ignition problem after about 200 miles put him out of contention. He later blew an engine. Bobby Allison lost any chance he had of victory when a tire equalized. It took 2 unscheduled stops to find out which tire. That put him 2 laps down, a deficit he could never make up. He wound up 5th. The record crowd was treated to some dandy racing between Parsons, Yarborough, and Earnhardt, but with less than 50 miles to go, Parsons was able to pull away. His performance was somewhat of a surprise to some. The fact that they don't run all the races, nobody paid much attention to them, but credibility was established in Atlanta. The race was free of any major accidents. Only 3 cautions were displayed because of minor spins, but the last one came when Don Hume spun with just 20 laps to go. Parsons was riding comfortably out front and almost counting the 50,000 plus that went to the winner. The caution bunched the field. Everybody pitted for fresh tires. Earnhardt got out of the pits first, Denny second, and Cale third. Only 14 laps remained when the green flag waved again, and they flat went at it. Parsons had to drive offensively to try to pass Earnhardt and defensively to try to hold Cale off. Finally, with 8 laps to go, he muscled around Earnhardt. Then Dale had to hold off Cale. That was a handful, but he managed to do it by half a car length. It was Parsons' first win since September of 1981. For MotorWeek Illustrated, this is Ned Jarrett reporting from the Atlanta International Raceway.
Well, Darrell Waltrip thought 5th place Sunday would maintain his Winston Cup point lead, but hours after the race, Waltrip was penalized for passing the pace car under yellow and dropped to 10th place. As a result, the 2-time Grand National champ falls to 3rd in the standings. Labonte finished 7th Sunday, enough to take the point lead. Meanwhile, Davey Allison had better luck at Atlanta than did his father. While Bobby struggled in the Grand National race, Davey was still celebrating Saturday's victory in the Automobile Racing Club of America 150-miler at AIR. Like the dragsters we saw earlier, sprint cars also have wings. Last Saturday, we were visited by 2-time World of Outlaw sprint car champ Sammy Swindell. Remember, Sammy told us he'd won 374 main events in a 12-year career? Well, now you can make that 375. These winged wonders ran 2 events last weekend near Atlanta. Sammy won the first one, and as we'll soon see, he came very close in the second. Saturday night, youthful pole sitter Bobby Davis Jr. in the yellow number 18 jumps out front. He quickly finds himself in a great battle with the red number 7 of veteran Tim Green. Well, they had a classic high-line, low-line race until Green slipped into the lead on lap 10. Then it became a 3-car affair. Enter number 1, our friend Swindell, en route to the front. Watch Sammy in traffic. The leaders blow by a lapped car. Swindell closes the door on Mr. Green. But Tim's traffic troubles were just beginning. 7 laps from the finish, he nudges a slower car, only to find himself suddenly stuck and stopped. That forced a restart. Davis led Swindell to the flag. The top 5 shows no sign of series champ and current leader Steve Kinzer. So Davis is now within 10 points of the lead, and he's got his sights set on Kinzer and Kinzer's crown.
What I really want is to win the World Outlaws. I've won a couple of championships around, but Steve's had enough of them, and I'd like to get one of them.
Well, as the World of Outlaw point battle heats up, the chase for another Formula One world driving title is about to begin. We'll have a look at the contenders when Motor Week continues. Long Beach Grand Prix runs next Sunday. We expect car owner Pat Patrick's STP Wildcats to be there with Gordon Johncock and Chip Ganasky at the controls, even though Patrick is in financial trouble. Patrick Petroleum, a $200 million company, is bankrupt. Patrick has agreed to liquidate it to satisfy its creditors, but he says the racing team won't be affected. Now, these are tough times for the man who helped establish championship auto racing teams, the IndyCar sanctioning body. Patrick's wife, Nancy, was critically injured in a Colorado skiing accident last week. And A.J. Foyt is back in the news. We heard this week that Chevrolet was paying A.J. to try to put a Chevy V6 turbo engine in the field for the Indy 500. We called Chevy. They said, talk to A.J. Foyt is at Sebring this weekend road racing a Porsche. So we asked him about the Chevy rumor. First he laughed. Then he said something unprintable. And then he added for the record, I ain't going to talk about it till after I've driven it, unquote. Now, I think that means that the rumor is true. Meanwhile, the opening of the Formula One World Championship road racing season is now just hours away. The most expensive racing cars and the best-paid drivers in the world are gathered near Rio de Janeiro for tomorrow's Brazilian Grand Prix. This could be the most competitive Grand Prix season in years. Nearly a dozen drivers have the skill and machinery to win races if their crews can deal with new rules that outlaw gas stops and dictate fast, fuel-efficient cars. Here, too, wings are a story. The most bizarre and effective aerodynamics in racing have sent lap records tumbling in preseason practice. These cars go ever faster as the wings press them to the ground, producing the highest cornering speeds of any wheeled vehicles on Earth. Now, let's meet the men who will vie for the title. World champ Nelson Piquet pulls on his balaclava one nose at a time like everyone else. In a BMW-powered Brabham, he'll seek the first back-to-back titles in 14 years. Italian Michele Alboreto moving to Ferrari this year. Alboreto convinced Enzo Ferrari to change company policy. Enzo hasn't hired an Italian driver in a decade, allegedly for fear a national hero might die in one of his cars. Frenchman Patrick Tambay, released by Ferrari, quickly snatched up by Renault, the French national team. And 82 world champ K.K. Rosberg may be toughest of them all. Honda has supplied a V6 turbo for the Flying Finn's Team Williams racer. After a long 83 season marked by illness and a shortage of horsepower, Rosberg comes back in 84 at the controls of an 1,100-pound race car that should handle with anything else on the track and which now sports nearly 1,000 thundering horsepower. Others to watch, Team McLaren providing Alain Prost and Niki Lauda with tag Porsche turbo engines in proven chassis, and the Lotus team should have surprisingly competitive cars, all new for Elio De Angelis and Nigel Mansell. Well, Bob Varsha will be here shortly to tell us how all those contenders have qualified down in Brazil. Now, last week we told you the Reborn International Race of Champions Series was suffering from a disagreement between its major sponsors. Well, that got us a heated phone call from series officials insisting that was old news. Budweiser and Chevrolet were fighting, but they're not anymore. And to update one last story, we told you a couple of weeks ago that Porsche planned to change its distribution system in North America and eliminate franchise dealers. That plan has been shelved in the face of potential avalanches of lawsuits. Politics of American motocross. First, the Japanese bike companies boycotted the American Motorcyclist Association, the AMA. That was a dispute over rules and schedules. Now, most of the AMA's Supercross promoters have gone off to run their own series. Everybody is fighting, and as always, the competitors are caught in the middle. An example, last Sunday, Team Honda skipped the AMA Supercross race at Talladega, Alabama, even though it paid points toward the Wrangler Grand National Motocross Championship. Team Honda rider David Bailey won that championship a year ago, and he wants to win it again. So he went to Talladega with his own motorcycle, trying to make the best of a bad situation.
A production bike is not what I would have chosen to ride, but I didn't have much choice. American Honda chose not to ride it because they feel like the AMA schedules too many races, which they do. And I didn't want to miss the race, so I showed up on my own. And I lacked a little power and a little suspension, but I felt like it was good enough. I went out and won my heat.
Well, that heat victory put Bailey in a 40-rider main event where he promptly fell victim to turn one traffic. The national champion found himself facing the wrong direction and far down in the field. Scott Burnworth on the Yellow Factory Suzuki outdueled Clint Hardick for the early lead, but before the end of lap 1, Jeff Ward used a much better line on the racetrack to zap Burnworth and take an advantage he never gave up. Ward, riding for Team Kawasaki, could have cared less if the other factories showed up. Number 2, Mark Barnett, who got nearly as bad a start as Bailey, put on a brilliant charge back to second, but Ward was never seriously threatened en route to his second Supercross win of the year. Bailey struggled back to finish 4th in a race that didn't get his fullest effort.
I rode it hard at times, and at other times I was thinking about all the controversy and how mad I was about the circumstances that I came here today with, so it was a frustrating main event.
In the Wrangler Grand National Points standings, Bailey lost the lead to race winner Jeff Ward on Sunday. Now the Supercross stars are in Houston, Texas this weekend. That's one of several stories that Bob Varsha has for us.
Dave, all the factory teams are in Houston for tonight's 5th round of the InSport Wrangler Supercross Series. That's the championship organization formed by those promoters who broke with the American Motorcyclists Association. Going into tonight's race, Kawasaki factory rider Jeff Ward, whom you just saw win the Talladega event, holds a slight points lead over Johnny O'Mara in that series. Meanwhile, in South Africa, American Freddie Spencer was supposed to begin defense of his 500cc World Motorcycle Road Racing Championship. South Africa, you may remember, was where it all began last year for the Shreveport, Louisiana native. Spencer won at South Africa in 1983 and went on to become the youngest champion ever in this, the most prestigious of motorcycling championships. This year, things just haven't worked out for Spencer, however. During qualifying for today's opening round of the World Championship, Spencer crashed heavily. He received strained tendons and badly bruised legs and decided not to start the event. With Spencer out of the picture, the race fell to fellow American Eddie Lawson. Lawson, who qualified a disappointing 12th, rode impressively in hazardous wet conditions to win his first ever World Championship Grand Prix. Behind Lawson were former World Endurance Champ Frenchman Raymond Roche and 2-time World Champ Englishman Barry Sheen. Back stateside, the 3rd race in the 1984 IMSA schedule, the 12 Hours of Sebring, is already in its second half. Let's go to MotorWeek's Jim Roller in Sebring for a report on the action thus far.
We're past the halfway point in the 32nd 12 Hours of Sebring, and the leaders are A.J. Foyt, Derek Bell, and Bob Wallach in a Porsche 935. 5 different cars have held down the top spot, including Daytona 24-hour winners Sarah Van der Merwe, Graham Duxbury, and Tony Martin. Brian Redmond used his Miami Grand Prix winning Jaguar to lead early, but both those cars have had mechanical troubles and have dropped way off the pace. Bell, Wallach, and Foyt currently hold a slim 1-minute lead over Bob Aiken, John Osteen, and Hans Stuck, and the final 6 hours of this 12-hour classic will be a true endurance test. Attrition has already claimed 40 of the 81 starters, and we've just reached the halfway point. From Sebring, Florida, for MotorWeek Illustrated, this is Jim Roller.
And in Brazil, qualifying is complete for tomorrow's season-opening Formula One Grand Prix. Italian Elio De Angelis in a Renault-powered Lotus has qualified on the pole. It's only the 2nd pole position of his career. Fellow Italian Michele Alboreto, making his debut with Ferrari, was 2nd fastest. Britain's Derek Warwick and France's Alain Prost will make up the 2nd row.
Well, it's obvious from that report we'll have abundant race action next Saturday when MotorWeek brings you Grand Prix highlights, the 12 Hours of Sebring, late model and modified stock car racing from Martinsville, Virginia, and the Supercross from the Houston Astrodome. Remember last month, stock car racer Benny Parsons made his debut as a TV pit reporter on our TBS Sports telecast of the Richmond 400. Before the race, he told color analyst Buddy Baker, quote, "The only thing you and I have to sell is experience," unquote. Benny's point was that he and Baker are now part-time drivers in the waning years of their careers. Well, last Sunday at Atlanta International Raceway, Parsons in number 55 proved when the occasion calls for it, he brings a lot more than experience to the track. He still has the skill, the courage to whip the Earnhardts and the Yarboroughs. Benny Parsons was out front all alone last Sunday en route to victory lane. I think this guy has potential to be a great pit reporter, but that's down the road. Right now, he's still a great race driver. Benny Parsons is our champion spark plug racer of the week. Well, that victory makes Parsons eligible for $100,000 from the Winston Cup Winner's Circle program. You'd think he'd be laughing all the way to the bank. But in fact, Benny is coming here next week to tell us whether or not he'll turn down the money. Benny will join us for a new look edition of MotorWeek. After 2 very successful seasons in these surroundings, we're moving on to a new anchor location next Saturday. But as part of that new look, I've been told to shave this beard, of which I'm very fond, and I haven't decided whether to do that or not. So tune in next Saturday at the same time and find out Benny Parsons' decision and mine. Finally today, Doug DeMocus, the motorcycle wheelie king. Here on Motor Week a couple of weeks back, he demonstrated these stunts. Last Sunday at Talladega, Alabama, he tried to set a 94-mile world wheelie record. He rode around on the back wheel like this for 92 miles, 2.5 hours, and then he stopped.